a quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in, let the outside world dissolve, and gently descend into tonight's world. Dimethyltryptamine, usually called DMT, is a small molecule with an oversized reputation. In a few minutes, it can push a person into scenes that feel more real than waking life. People report impossible architecture, living symbols, and strange conversations with beings that seem to have intentions. When the effect ends, many say they were not dreaming. They say they visited somewhere. This episode is a documentary-style look at what is known, what is reported, and what is still a mystery. We will start with the chemistry and the brain. We will look at how DMT is taken, how fast it acts, and what it does to perception. Then we will move into the most mind-bending trip reports that have been shared in public for decades, including repeating themes like geometric tunnels, machine-like worlds, and entities that appear to communicate without words. We will compare different explanations, from neuroscience to philosophy, and we will close with the hardest question. What should we do with an experience that feels so convincing, even when we cannot prove what it is? Tonight, we explore the most mind-bending DMT trips ever recorded. Before we get into the best-known trip narratives, we need to be honest about what counts as a recorded report. A recorded DMT story usually comes from one of a few sources. One source is clinical research. The best-known modern DMT study in the United States was led by psychiatrist Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque in the early 1990s. Volunteers received measured doses of DMT in a hospital research setting with medical staff present. The trip reports were written down and discussed after the session. These are not anonymous internet claims. They are still subjective, but they are tied to a specific place, a specific time, and a documented protocol. Another source is field reporting and long-form interviews. Writers and researchers have collected accounts from experienced users, often with years of repeated exposure, who can describe repeating motifs with unusual detail. A third source is first-person trip archives, such as Erowid, where reports are submitted with timestamps and context. These reports vary in quality, but the best ones are vivid, structured, and self-critical, with enough detail to treat them as documents rather than simple claims. With that in mind, here are several well-known case clusters described in a documentary way. In Strassman's New Mexico sessions, several volunteers reported what they described as a sudden transition away from the room into a complete environment, with the sense that something in that environment noticed them. Strassman describes volunteers who felt they were being examined, handled, or instructed. Some described beings that looked like technicians. Some described a place that felt like a staging area. The striking part is not that they saw strange shapes. The striking part is the repeated social structure, the sense of an organized space with roles. In the same clinical setting, some volunteers reported something that resembles a medical procedure. The person would feel pressure, then an abrupt shift into a scene where figures were close, working fast, as if the trip had an agenda. The volunteers would return with a sense that something had been done to them. In the language of modern trip culture, this is sometimes called surgery, but in the New Mexico context, it was described as an unusual but coherent event, often accompanied by the feeling that it was purposeful. Outside the lab, some of the most famous public descriptions come from Terence McKenna, who repeatedly described small, fast, intelligent presences that seem to perform visual demonstrations. McKenna used the phrase machine elves, which has become a cultural shorthand. The value of his accounts for this documentary is not the label. It is the consistency of the scene he described, a space that feels manufactured, inhabited by entities that act as if they can manipulate the visual fabric itself. Now add another category of recorded accounts: ayahuasca narratives from the Amazon and from modern retreat settings in Peru and Brazil. These are not the same as smoked DMT, but they are DMT experiences documented in writing and oral tradition. People describe sequences that unfold over hours, an initial phase of physical discomfort, then intense imagery, then encounters that are interpreted as spirits, teachers, or healers, depending on the cultural frame. In these narratives, the entities do not always behave like pranksters. They often behave like instructors or doctors. What matters is that these different contexts keep producing similar core motifs. Even when the stories are told with different beliefs, DMT exists in nature. It appears in many plants, and it is present in a number of animals. It is part of a wider family called tryptamines, molecules shaped around a structure that is also found in serotonin. Serotonin is one of the most important signaling chemicals in the brain, involved in mood, appetite, sleep, and many other processes. Because DMT resembles serotonin, it can interact with serotonin receptors. DMT also has a special relationship with another group of receptors, often called 5-HT2A receptors. These receptors are a major target for classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. When these receptors are activated in a certain way, the brain shifts how it handles prediction, attention, and the balance between internal and external signals. Many researchers think this is part of why psychedelics can produce intense changes in imagery, meaning, and emotion. One of the first problems in understanding DMT is that the experience is not just strong, it is structured. It often has a beginning that many people describe in similar terms. It can have phases, it can contain repeating motifs, and it can feel populated. The typical route that produces the famous fast trip is inhalation. DMT can be vaporized and inhaled. When that happens, it reaches the brain very quickly. People often describe a rapid climb in seconds. Ordinary objects can fragment into patterns. The sense of the room can vanish. A person can feel like they are moving through a tunnel or a membrane. The peak can arrive in less than a minute. Then there is usually a plateau, and then a descent. Many report that the overall event lasts around 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the dose and method. There are other routes. If DMT is swallowed by itself, it is usually broken down in the body by enzymes called monoamine oxidase, often shortened to MAO. That is why oral DMT by itself is usually inactive. But if a person takes an MAO inhibitor, then oral DMT can become active and can last hours. This is the basis of ayahuasca, a traditional brew that combines DMT containing plants with plants that provide MAO inhibiting compounds. The ayahuasca experience is often slower, longer, and shaped by nausea and bodily effects. It also occurs in a cultural setting, which changes how people interpret what they see. When people speak about the most insane DMT trips, they often refer to inhaled DMT because its speed and intensity can overwhelm normal thinking. The phrase breakthrough is common. It refers to an experience where the person feels they pass beyond the usual visuals into a full environment, as if they are no longer in their body. Not everyone uses the term the same way, but many reports include the feeling of crossing a threshold. To understand why DMT can do this, it helps to understand the brain as a prediction machine. The brain does not just record the world, it constantly predicts what is out there, and it updates those predictions using sensory input. In everyday life, the brain keeps a stable model. It downplays unlikely interpretations. It holds the self as a center point. It filters a vast amount of signal. That filtering is part of why we can function. Psychedelics seem to loosen that filtering. One influential idea is that they reduce the precision of top-down predictions, or they change the weight the brain gives to them. Another idea is that they increase the entropy of brain activity, meaning the brain becomes more flexible and less locked into a small set of patterns. Under these conditions, the brain can generate vivid imagery and can assign meaning in new ways. It can also lose the usual boundaries between self and world. DMT seems to do this in an extreme and rapid way. The speed matters. A slow change might allow the mind to adjust. DMT arrives like a shock. A person can go from normal to completely transformed in less time than it takes to say a sentence. There is also the question of endogenous DMT. Some people ask if the body makes DMT on its own, and if it plays a role in dreams or near-death experiences. DMT can be detected in some biological samples, and the body can make trace amounts of many compounds. But the idea that a huge flood of DMT happens naturally in the brain at death has not been proven. It remains a popular story, but the evidence is incomplete. What can be said is that the brain has many ways to create dreamlike and visionary states without DMT, and DMT can mimic some aspects of those states. Now we reach the part that pulls most people in, the reports. This is where the story has to live, not in receptor charts and not in abstract theories, but in what people say they actually saw and what they say they actually felt. Again and again, the reports begin the same way. A person inhales. The last clear memory is the room, a wall, a lamp, the edge of a table. Then the air itself seems to harden into pattern. The world takes on a glassy, vibrating look, as if the scene is about to shatter. Many describe a rising sound, like a high electric whine, a rocket hum, or a fast mechanical buzz. Some describe a deep bass pulse that feels more like pressure than sound. The body can feel heavy, then suddenly absent. Then, very fast, the room is gone. Some people describe the moment as being folded. Others describe it as being shot forward. Others describe it as being pulled through a seam in reality, as if the world had a zipper and it was opened. The most common image is a tunnel, but it is not a simple tunnel. It can be a tunnel made of repeating tiles, or a tunnel made of living stained glass, or a tunnel made of symbols that rotate and interlock. The motion feels fast, but the tunnel itself can feel perfectly stable, like a corridor built to handle speed. At the end of this corridor, many people report a threshold. They do not always call it a threshold, but they describe a moment where the trip seems to ask a question. Do you want to go further? Some report fish at this moment, not because something scary is happening, but because the sense of control is slipping away. Many describe the feeling of dying. They feel their identity breaking apart. They feel certain for a moment that they will not come back. And then, either by surrender or by accident, they cross. This is where the reports turn into full environments. People describe arriving somewhere that feels finished, like a place that existed before they got there. They describe depth, layout, and sometimes even an atmosphere, like humidity or static charge. And in a surprising number of reports, they describe not being alone. They describe a presence that reacts to them like a person would react to a stranger entering a locked room. Surprise, curiosity, annoyance, amusement. Sometimes a cold, clinical focus. In some accounts, the entities approach. In others, they stay at a distance. In others, they appear behind a barrier, as if the visitor is in a viewing booth. People use different names, but the feelings they report are often specific. They feel watched. They feel scanned. They feel evaluated. They feel like they have walked into a place with rules, and they do not know the rules. These are not laboratory measurements. They are stories. But they have patterns, and when patterns repeat across cultures and decades, it becomes reasonable to ask what is driving them. The first pattern is geometry. Many people report seeing bright geometric forms, often with a sense of depth and motion. Some see grids, lattices, and repeating tiles. Some see shapes that seem to fold into each other. Many report a tunnel of patterns, like moving through a corridor made of living designs. The colors can be intense, sometimes described as beyond any normal color. A second pattern is an encounter with something like a presence. This is often described as entities. The word is vague, and different people mean different things. Some describe humanoid forms. Others describe animals, clowns, insects, or machines. Some describe a presence that is felt more than seen. The common theme is that it feels like another mind is there. A third pattern is communication. Many report that these entities communicate directly, without spoken language. They may send meaning as a complete package. They may show symbols. They may demonstrate objects. People often say the message is clear in the moment, but hard to translate after. A fourth pattern is the sense of a place. Many do not feel they are floating in an abstract space. They feel they entered a world. Sometimes it is described as a room, sometimes as a vast city, sometimes as a factory, sometimes as a carnival, sometimes as a temple. A fifth pattern is emotional force. DMT can produce terror. It can also produce awe and joy. Many report a sense of love, but also a sense of being judged or examined. Many report that the experience feels important, like it carries weight. To keep this documentary, we have to separate 3 layers. What is experienced, what is interpreted, and what is claimed about reality. The experience layer includes visuals, sounds, body sensations, and thoughts. The interpretation layer includes what the person believes it means. The claim layer includes statements like, "This is another dimension," or "These are real beings." The most mind-bending reports often cross all 3 layers at once. A person sees something, interprets it as a being, and then claims the being has knowledge about the universe. That does not mean the claim is true, but it does not mean it is false either. It means we do not have enough information to treat it like a fact. One famous cluster of reports involves what some call the waiting room. The person feels they entered a transitional space. It is not the full breakthrough world. It is like a lobby. In this space, entities might appear behind a veil. The person might feel tested, teased, or prepared. Some say they are told to let go more. Another cluster involves what some call the chrysanthemum. People report a central blooming structure, like a flower of geometry. It can feel like a gate. It can open into a deeper scene. Another cluster involves machine elves. This phrase is popular and controversial. It comes from the writer Terence McKenna, who described small, playful entities that seem to perform tricks and present objects. Many people have since used the phrase, even when their entities are not small or elf-like. What matters is the pattern. A set of beings that seem energetic, fast, intelligent, and interested in the visitor. There are also reports of beings that seem more serious. Some report tall figures, sometimes described as doctors or technicians. They may perform a procedure. They may open the person up, remove something, or insert something. The person may feel fear, but also a sense that it is necessary. These reports are striking because they resemble some accounts of medical procedures and also resemble certain alien abduction narratives. The overlap could be coincidence, or it could reflect shared brain templates for certain kinds of strange experiences. Consider a specific style of report. A person inhales, the room dissolves, and they find themselves on a table. Figures stand around. They communicate without words. The person feels their chest opened. They see a glowing object placed inside. They feel a rush of relief. Then they are sent back. They wake up crying, convinced they were repaired. Another report style is a tour. The person enters a city of impossible angles. Buildings shift as if they are made of thoughts. Beings guide them. The person is shown scenes like lessons. Each scene contains an emotion and an idea. The person returns with the sense they were taught something about death or love. Another style is a joke. The person enters and the entities laugh, as if they knew this would happen. They may mock the person in a friendly way. They may say, in meaning, rather than words, "You came back again." They may show a sign that says welcome, even if there is no text in reality. The person feels like the entities are aware of the human world and treat it like a game. Another style is the cosmic machine. The person enters a giant mechanism, like gears and conveyor belts made of light. The entities are workers. The visitor is shown that reality is manufactured. The visitor feels horror, because if reality is a machine, then the self is a component. But the visitor also feels awe, because the machine is beautiful. In a purely scientific frame, these could be metaphors produced by the brain. The brain might use factory imagery to represent unconscious processes. It might use doctors to represent self-repair. It might use jokes to represent the brain recognizing its own pattern generation. But there is a reason people resist that explanation. The experience often feels not like a metaphor, but like contact. People often report that the entities react to the person in real time. They report surprise, or annoyance, or curiosity. They report that the entities can block them, push them away, or pull them closer. This leads to the most interesting question. Why does the experience have social features? In everyday life, the brain is built to model other minds. Social cognition is central to survival. We have neural systems that detect agency. We look for faces. We infer intent. This helps explain why humans can see meaning in clouds or hear words in noise. But DMT experiences can be far beyond a simple false detection. They can involve sustained interaction. One explanation is that under DMT, the brain's normal boundary between self-generated thought and external perception breaks down. Internal content can be misattributed as external. The brain can generate a dialogue, but it feels like another being because it is not tagged as self. Another explanation is that the brain has many semi-independent systems. Under normal conditions, they are coordinated. Under psychedelic conditions, they can separate. One system might present content to another system, and the receiving system experiences it as other. In that sense, entities could be parts of the mind that normally do not speak. A third explanation is cultural. People hear about entities. They expect them. They then perceive them. This can happen, but it does not fully explain the strong similarity in people who claim they had no prior knowledge. A fourth explanation is philosophical, that the mind is not sealed inside the skull in the way we assume. This is less a scientific claim and more a metaphysical one. Some traditions claim consciousness is fundamental, and the brain filters it rather than producing it. In that view, DMT could weaken the filter and allow access to a wider field. We should be careful with that. It is a big claim, but it is one reason DMT remains so compelling. It touches questions that science does not settle easily. Now we will look at the science of DMT trips in more detail. When DMT enters the brain, it binds to receptors. The exact cascade is complex, but we can connect it to known networks. One network often discussed in psychedelic research is the default mode network, a set of brain regions that is active when a person is thinking about themselves, their past, their future, and social identity. Many studies suggest that psychedelics reduce the coherence of this network. When that network loosens, people often report ego dissolution, the feeling that the self is not a solid object. Ego dissolution can be terrifying. The self is the anchor for everyday life. When it dissolves, a person can feel like they are dying. Many DMT users report a moment of fear that they will not come back. Some report that they did not resist, and that when they stopped resisting, the fear turned into openness. But we should not turn this into advice. The point is that many reports include a crisis and then a shift. The crisis can look like death. The shift can feel like rebirth. Another element is time distortion. People often report that the trip felt far longer than it was. A 10-minute trip can feel like an hour, or a day, or a lifetime. This suggests that the brain's timekeeping is strongly affected. Memory encoding, attention, and sequence processing can all shift. There is also synesthesia, the blending of senses. People may see sounds. They may hear colors. They may feel textures as if they are music. This may relate to changes in how different sensory regions communicate. Then there is the sense of hyperreality. This is not just vividness. It is a feeling that the experience is more real than the everyday world. Some researchers think this could be related to prediction error. If the brain's usual model is disrupted, the brain might treat the incoming strange patterns as highly informative. That could create a feeling of certainty. This is important. A feeling of certainty is not a proof. Many states can produce certainty, including dreams and delusions. But in the moment, certainty is persuasive. Now we can move into some of the most extreme story themes. One theme is the download. People report receiving a huge amount of information at once. They might feel they learned the meaning of life. They might feel they understood mathematics. They might feel they saw the structure of reality. When they return, they cannot explain it. But the feeling remains. From a brain perspective, This could be a surge in associative processing. The brain links many ideas together. It feels like insight, but without stable memory encoding, the content does not store. What remains is the emotional tag, important. Another theme is recursion. People report loops. They feel trapped in repeating scenes. They see the same pattern unfold again and again. They may feel they will be stuck forever. This can happen in intense psychedelic states. It may relate to how the brain builds sequences and the sense of progress. Another theme is archetypes. People see gods, demons, angels, and mythic animals. They may see scenes that resemble religious art or ancient symbols. This could reflect shared human imagery, or it could reflect the brain reaching for the strongest symbolic language it has. Another theme is alienness. Some DMT spaces feel beyond human design. They contain structures that do not map to known culture. People struggle to describe them. They use phrases like impossible geometry. They say the space is four-dimensional. They say objects turn inside out. In physics, dimensions are mathematical degrees of freedom. In experience, calling something four-dimensional often means it has properties that cannot be represented in normal 3D intuition. The brain can generate such scenes by breaking the usual constraints of perception. But again, that does not settle the question. It only shows that the brain is capable of it. Now we will take a closer look at how people record these stories. There are trip reports written down in books, forums, and research archives. There are also interviews. The most famous modern example is the use of DMT in clinical research settings, where volunteers receive DMT in a controlled environment and report their experience. Some reports from these settings also include entities and otherworldly scenes. This matters because it reduces the influence of chaotic surroundings, but it does not remove expectation entirely. There are also reports from traditional use in certain cultures, especially with ayahuasca. These reports can include spirits, animal guides, and journeys. The cultural frame often treats the experience as contact with the spirit world. The same experience can be interpreted very differently depending on the culture. There is also the modern underground culture, where people inhale DMT and share stories online. This culture has its own language and its own memes that can shape reports. So to focus on the most insane stories ever recorded, we can look for those that appear in multiple places, or that are described with unusual clarity, or that match patterns known in the literature. One intense report pattern is the being that controls the trip. The person feels they are met by a being that decides what happens. The being may block entry. The being may say, "Not now." The being may scold the person for coming too often. The being may display authority. This is striking because it implies agency beyond the visitor. In a brain model, it could reflect the brain's own control systems, like a gatekeeper. The mind might generate an avatar of regulation. The person might feel that avatar as a being. Another intense pattern is the being that repairs. The visitor is taken apart and put back. They return with a sense they were fixed. Sometimes people say their depression lifted. Sometimes they say they stopped addiction. In reality, the evidence for long-term changes from DMT alone is not clear, but some do report changes. In psychedelic therapy, changes are often linked to integration, the process of making sense of the experience and changing behavior. DMT could trigger a shift, but without integration, it may fade. Another pattern is the being that reveals a secret. The visitor is shown that reality is staged. The visitor is shown that the human world is a surface layer. Behind it is a deeper layer. The being may laugh as if the visitor finally saw it. This can be interpreted as a classic revelation story. Many religions include a revelation that the world is not as it seems. In a brain model, psychedelics can disrupt the assumptions that make the world feel stable. That disruption can feel like seeing the hidden machinery. Now we reach the meaning question. What are we seeing? There are at least 5 major theory families. Theory 1 is the brain fabrication theory. The brain generates the entire experience. The entities are hallucinations. The places are hallucinations. The meaning is constructed. In this theory, the key question is not whether the visions are real, but why the brain makes them and why they are structured. Theory 2 is the subconscious communication theory. The entities are parts of the self. They represent hidden emotions, hidden knowledge, and hidden conflicts. They appear as other because that is how the mind can communicate with itself. In this theory, the key value is psychological insight. Theory 3 is the cultural and mimetic theory. The DMT space is partly shaped by shared stories. People build a mythology. New users absorb it. Then they see it. In this theory, the DMT world is a shared narrative. Theory 4 is the informational field theory. Consciousness is not only produced by the brain. The brain is a receiver and filter. DMT changes the filter. The person accesses a wider informational field. Entities might be real in some sense, or they might be patterns in the field. Theory 5 is the otherworld contact theory. The DMT experience is literal contact with another domain, another dimension, or another layer of reality. Entities are real beings. The space is real. The brain is somehow interfacing with it. Science can test parts of these theories, but not all. We can measure brain changes. We can compare reports. We can test expectation effects. But we cannot easily test whether an entity is external, because the entity does not leave physical evidence in most stories. That does not mean we should ignore the reports. It means we should treat them as data about the mind and about belief. Now, we will dig deeper into the most interesting theories and how they connect to what is known in neuroscience. One key concept is the model of perception called predictive processing. In this model, the brain is constantly predicting sensory input. The brain sends predictions down the hierarchy. Sensory input sends errors up. The brain tries to reduce error. Under psychedelics, the weighting of predictions and errors can change. If high-level predictions lose dominance, then the brain may become more influenced by lower-level signals and spontaneous activity. This could create unusual patterns. It could also create a sense that the world is new. Another concept is the idea of the brain as a constraint system. Under normal conditions, the brain constrains possible interpretations. Under DMT, constraints loosen. The brain explores a larger space of possible scenes. Another concept is the role of the thalamus, a structure that relays sensory information and regulates flow. Some theories suggest psychedelics change thalamic gating, allowing more internal noise to reach consciousness. This could contribute to the flood of imagery. Another concept is the role of the visual cortex. Under psychedelics, the visual system can become active even with eyes closed. The brain can generate visuals from memory and from internal patterns. But none of this explains why entities feel intelligent. To address that, we need to look at how the brain builds agency. The brain has modules that infer agents. If a pattern behaves like it has goals, the brain tags it as an agent. Under DMT, the brain can generate patterns that behave with apparent intention. This could be enough to produce the entity feeling. There is also the possibility of language and meaning systems being activated in unusual ways. The brain can generate a narrative that feels external. Now we will move into a series of detailed story themes, presented as a catalogue. These are drawn from the kinds of reports that have been shared repeatedly. They are not presented as proof. They are presented as a map of what people say happens. Theme 1, the geometric launch. A person inhales. The room becomes a grid. Surfaces break into triangles. The grid folds. The person feels acceleration. A tunnel forms. The tunnel is made of repeating patterns. The tunnel is alive. The person feels they are being pulled. Theme 2, the membrane. At the end of the tunnel, there is a thin barrier. It looks like a sheet of light. It looks like a skin. The person feels if they pass through, they will not be the same. They pass through anyway. Theme 3, the arrival. The person is in a space that feels like a room, but not in any human building. The space is bright. It is filled with objects that shift. The person is aware of their own thought as a physical force. Theme 4, the greeting. A presence appears. The presence feels like it noticed the visitor instantly. The presence may appear surprised, amused, or routine. The visitor may feel like an intruder. Theme 5, the demonstration. The entity presents an object. The object is like a toy, but it contains deep meaning. The entity unfolds it like a puzzle. The visitor understands the meaning in the moment. Theme 6, the language. The entity communicates without words. The visitor receives meaning, like a compressed file that expands instantly. Theme 7, the request. The entity asks the visitor to do something. Sometimes it asks the visitor to let go. Sometimes it asks the visitor to stop coming. Sometimes it asks the visitor to remember something. Theme 8, the surgery. The visitor is placed on a table. Beings surround. The visitor feels opened. A bright tool moves through them. They feel an emotion pulled out like a thread. Theme 9, the lesson. The visitor is shown scenes like slides. Each scene is a story about life and death. The visitor feels the scenes are arranged for them. Theme 10, the exit. The visitor is pushed back. The room returns. The visitor is on the floor, shaking, with the sense that time passed differently. Now, to meet the promise of the most mind-bending trips ever recorded, we have to include the reports that go beyond these themes. There are reports where the visitor feels they lived another life, not just saw scenes, but lived as another person in another world. They had memories. They had relationships. Then they returned to their body and felt grief. There are reports where the visitor feels they met a being that knows them better than they know themselves. The being points out their habits and fears. The visitor feels exposed. There are reports where the visitor feels they saw the moment of their own death. They saw it as a scene. They felt it. They returned with fear or acceptance. There are reports where the visitor feels they were shown a future. They saw a personal event. Later, they believed it came true. These stories are hard to evaluate because memory can reshape itself to match events. There are reports where the visitor feels they were warned. The being says, "Do not do this again." Or the being says, "You are not ready." The visitor returns with the sense of a boundary. There are reports where the visitor feels the entities are running a simulation. The visitor sees screens, controls, and panels. The visitor feels the human world is like a stage. There are reports where the visitor feels the entities are manufacturing souls. They see a conveyor of glowing spheres. They see beings shaping them. They return with dread or wonder. There are reports where the visitor feels they met a being that is the source of reality. A single presence fills the space. The visitor cannot look at it directly. The visitor feels absolute power. There are reports where the visitor feels the space is not separate. It is inside them. The being says, "This is you." The visitor feels identity collapse. These stories can sound like fiction, but the people telling them often speak with seriousness and sometimes with fear. That is part of why DMT has a special status among psychedelics. Now we will address the question of insane stories and what counts as recorded. A recorded story is one that has been written down or spoken in an interview. It is not a private memory. The internet has made recording common. But even in older times, there were reports of visionary experiences from substances and from meditation. DMT is modern in the sense that it is often used in purified form, but the experience may overlap with older visionary states. Some researchers point to the similarity between DMT reports and certain near-death experiences. Near-death experiences can include tunnels, lights, beings, and life reviews. Not every near-death experience includes those, but the overlap is interesting. It suggests that the brain has a set of ways it can generate the feeling of crossing into another realm. This does not prove that DMT is a near-death chemical, but it suggests that the brain can produce a similar narrative when pushed into extreme states. Now we will talk about the meaning of the visuals. Many DMT visuals look like geometry. Why geometry? The visual system has a structure. It detects edges, contrast, and repeating patterns. When the system is activated internally, it may produce patterns that reflect its own wiring. This is one reason certain hallucinations, called form constants, appear across different causes. These include tunnels, spirals, lattices, and cobweb patterns. So the tunnel could be the visual cortex expressing itself. But the DMT tunnel often has added features. It can feel like travel. It can have emotions. It can lead to a place. This is where the whole brain comes in. The visual system provides the form. The memory system provides content. The emotion system provides significance. The narrative system provides a story. Now we will discuss the entity problem with more precision. If entities are internal, why do they sometimes say unexpected things? One answer is that the mind contains unexpected content. The mind has knowledge that the conscious self does not access easily. Under DMT, unusual connections form. The result can feel like an external voice. Another answer is that unexpected does not mean external. Dreams are unexpected too. A deeper answer is that the brain has generative models of other minds. It can simulate a mind that has different knowledge. This is how humans imagine conversations. Under DMT, that simulation can become immersive. Now we will talk about set and setting. These are the two variables that shape psychedelic experiences strongly. Set is the mindset of the person. Setting is the environment. Inhaled DMT is so fast that setting may matter less than in a long trip. but it still matters. A safe environment can reduce panic. Expectation can shape interpretation. A person who thinks DMT is a portal may interpret entities as real beings. A person who thinks DMT is brain chemistry may interpret them as mind fragments. Both people may see similar forms. This suggests that the core imagery may be similar, while the story is shaped by belief. Now, we will address the most interesting theories about what we are seeing. One theory is the reality filter theory, sometimes associated with the idea that the brain reduces reality. In this view, consciousness is like a flashlight. The brain shapes what is illuminated. DMT could change the lens. This theory is attractive because it respects the intensity of the experience, but it is hard to test. Another theory is the simulation interface theory. The idea is that reality has layers. The human layer is an interface. DMT reveals the code layer. Entities are system processes. This theory explains the machine imagery. It explains the sense of being monitored. It also fits modern culture, which is surrounded by technology. But again, it is hard to test. Another theory is the collective unconscious theory. The idea is that humans share deep mental structures. DMT reveals them. Entities are archetypes. This theory fits the mythic imagery. It also fits the repetition across people. But it does not explain why entities feel like independent minds. Another theory is the informational ecology theory. The idea is that minds are not isolated. They are part of a larger ecology of information. Under DMT, the mind becomes sensitive to patterns that it normally ignores. Entities could be patterns in that ecology. This theory is speculative, but it is a way to talk about otherness without claiming physical beings. Now we will move into the core of the episode, a long documentary walk through specific categories of DMT trip stories, the science that can relate to them, and the open questions. Category 1. The tunnel and launch. The tunnel is often described as a corridor of repeating shapes. The shapes can be sharp and mechanical, or soft and organic. The tunnel can have a central vanishing point. The person can feel they are moving. The movement feeling could be a change in vestibular processing, the brain's sense of balance and motion. Many altered states can cause motion illusions. The tunnel could also be a transition in attention, from external to internal, represented visually. Category 2. The waiting room. The waiting room is often described as a space where the visitor is not yet fully in the other world. It can feel like a threshold. The visitor may see entities behind a barrier. The visitor may feel teased. One explanation is that the brain is building the full scene. The waiting room is a partial construction. The barrier is the remaining self-control. Category 3. The breakthrough world. This is often described as a full environment. The visitor feels they are in a place. The place can be stable. The visitor can look around. The place can have depth and objects. In neuroscience, this could be a form of immersive hallucination, where the brain's internal model becomes the primary source of perception. Category 4. The entity encounter. Entities can be many forms, but many share a sense of intelligence and intention. The brain has a system for theory of mind, for modeling other minds. Under DMT, this system may be activated with internally generated content. Category 5. The communication. Many report telepathic meaning. This could reflect the brain's ability to generate meaning without language. The mind can compress meaning into a feeling. Category 6. The emotional trial. Some trips are described as tests. The visitor is judged. They feel their life is reviewed. This could reflect moral cognition and self-evaluation. Under DMT, these systems could become externalized. Category 7. The procedure. The procedure or surgery theme may reflect interoception, the brain's sense of the body. Under psychedelics, interoception can distort. The brain may interpret body sensations as external actions. Category 8. The cosmic mechanism. The factory or machine world theme may reflect the brain's pattern of understanding systems. The mind may represent the unconscious as machinery. Category 9. The dissolving self. The loss of self can be represented as being absorbed, or being shattered, or becoming light. This connects to the default mode network and identity processing. Category 10. The return. The return can be abrupt. The person may feel shock. They may feel they were gone for much longer. Now we will address specific claims that are often attached to DMT. Claim: DMT shows a real other dimension. This is a strong claim. It requires evidence beyond personal experience. Right now, we do not have that. But the claim persists because the experience feels like a place. Claim: DMT entities are real beings. Again, we do not have direct evidence, but we do have a consistent pattern of reports. The pattern could be produced by the human brain, or it could reflect something external. We cannot conclude. Claim: DMT reveals the afterlife. Some people report meeting dead relatives or being told they will die. The brain can generate such content. Without independent verification, it remains personal meaning. Claim: DMT is released at death. This has not been proven. The body may produce DMT in trace amounts, but a flood at death is not established. Now we will consider what makes a story mind-bending. It is mind-bending when it violates core assumptions, that space is stable, that time flows, that the self is inside the body, that other minds are separate bodies, that objects have fixed shape. DMT violates these assumptions quickly. Some of the most mind-bending stories include what people call impossible objects. Objects that are not just complex, but logically contradictory. An object that is both inside and outside itself. An object that unfolds into an infinite series. In mathematics, there are objects like fractals that contain repeating structure at different scales. The brain can generate fractal-like images under psychedelics. If the brain adds meaning, the fractal can feel like a message. Another mind-bending story theme is the sense that the entities are aware of the person's thoughts before the person thinks them. This could reflect the way thoughts are generated unconsciously before becoming conscious. The person experiences the pre-conscious as another mind. Another theme is the sense that the entities know the person has a life outside the trip and they comment on it. The person feels seen. This could be the mind using social cognition on self-knowledge. Another theme is the sense of being shown that the human world is a play. The entities act like stagehands. The visitor sees behind the set. This is a powerful metaphor for how the brain constructs reality. But it can also be interpreted as a literal claim. Now we will examine the overlap between DMT reports and other altered states. Dreams can be vivid, but most dreams do not have the same intensity of geometry. But some dreams do. Meditation can produce visions. Some reports from deep meditation include lights and beings. Psychosis can produce voices and delusions, but DMT differs because it is time-limited and often recognized as drug-induced. Near-death experiences can include tunnels and beings. This overlap suggests that the brain has a limited set of ways to represent extreme transitions. Now we will address harm and safety briefly, because any documentary about DMT should. DMT is powerful. It can cause panic. It can cause dangerous behavior if taken in unsafe settings. It can also interact with certain medications, especially MAO inhibitors and serotonergic drugs. People with certain mental health conditions may be at higher risk for adverse reactions. This is not a guide. It is a description of risk. Now we return to the most insane stories. Some of the most extreme stories include a sense of being dissolved into a collective mind. The visitor feels they are part of a vast network of minds. They feel they can access memories that are not theirs. This could reflect the brain's association systems generating a sense of unity, but it also connects to philosophical ideas about consciousness. Some extreme stories include a sense of being told that reality is built out of language or code. The visitor sees symbols that feel like a base layer. The visitor feels that the symbols are not human language, but an underlying grammar. This resembles experiences reported under other psychedelics as well. It may reflect the brain's ability to generate symbolic patterns and interpret them as meaning. Some extreme stories include a sense of being trapped in a loop of death and rebirth. The visitor lives a cycle. The visitor feels they have been here many times. This could reflect memory and time processing changes. Some extreme stories include a sense of being a child again, or being an animal, or being an object. Identity becomes fluid. This could reflect the loss of the usual self model. Now we will move through a long timeline of a hypothetical composite DMT trip built from repeated reports to show how these elements can unfold. A person sits down, they inhale. There is a harsh taste. The chest feels tight. The room begins to vibrate visually. Edges shimmer. Sound becomes strange. Then the room breaks into geometric fragments. The person feels acceleration. The tunnel forms. The tunnel is made of repeating patterns like stained glass. The person feels pulled forward. The body disappears. At the end of the tunnel is a barrier. It looks like a curtain of light. The person feels fear. The person feels that crossing means losing control. The person crosses. The person is in a space that is not the room. It feels like a chamber. The chamber is filled with objects that shift and fold. The person sees structures that look like machines made of light. A presence appears. It does not speak. It is aware. It is close. The presence is joined by others. They move quickly. They surround. The person feels examined. A being presents an object, like a toy. It unfolds the toy. The toy contains a lesson. The lesson is felt instantly. The being communicates a message, like you are not supposed to be afraid, or you are doing fine, or you have to stop lying to yourself. The message arrives as pure meaning. Then the scene shifts. The person is on a table. The beings perform a procedure. The person feels pressure in the chest. The person feels something removed. The person feels relief. Then the beings step back. The visitor is pushed away. The tunnel returns. The room returns. The person is back in the body. The person opens eyes. The room looks normal, but strange. The person can barely speak. The person remembers the feeling of having been somewhere else. Now, we will talk about the most common after effects. People often report that the world looks sharper. They may feel gratitude. They may feel fear. They may feel the trip was too much. Some report that their fear of death decreased. Others report that their fear increased. Some report that they felt humbled. Others report that they felt special. This spread shows that interpretation matters. Now we will examine how researchers study these experiences. In clinical studies, volunteers can receive DMT intravenously. This allows precise dosing. Researchers can measure brain activity with EEG or fMRI. They can collect reports. One limitation is that the scanner environment is noisy and confined. That can shape the experience. Even so, volunteers often report intense visual and emotional effects, and sometimes entities. EEG studies often show changes in brain rhythms. Some show decreased alpha power, which is associated with changes in visual processing and attention. fMRI studies of psychedelics show changes in connectivity between brain regions. The overall picture is that psychedelics increase the diversity of brain states. Now, we will address one of the most debated questions. Are DMT experiences meaningful? Many people say yes. They say the experience changed their life. They say it showed them they need to change. From a psychological standpoint, a powerful experience can change behavior. It can change priorities. It can break habits. But meaning can also be misleading. A person can become convinced of a false belief. So the best approach is to separate the value of the experience from the factual claims. An experience can be valuable even if its content is not literally true. Now we will move into the theories of what we are seeing with more depth. Neuroscience theory. The brain as a hallucination engine. The brain has to fill gaps. It fills blind spots. It constructs color. It constructs a stable world. In that sense, ordinary perception is already a controlled hallucination. Under DMT, the controls loosen. The hallucination becomes obvious. In this view, entities are constructed social hallucinations. This theory predicts that entity encounters should correlate with activity in social cognition networks. It also predicts that expectation should modulate content. It is testable in part. Philosophical theory, consciousness as fundamental. In this view, the brain is not the source of consciousness. The brain is a modulator. DMT changes modulation. In this view, the DMT space could be a real domain of consciousness. This theory is harder to test. Simulation theory, the DMT interface. In this view, the world we see is an interface layer. DMT shows the backend. Entities are processes. Again, hard to test. Archetype theory, shared patterns. In this view, the DMT entities are archetypes. They are shared because humans share brain structure. This is partly testable by comparing reports. Now we will look at the most interesting, evidence-like patterns in reports. One is the repeat encounter pattern. Some users claim they meet the same entity across separate trips. This could be memory and expectation. The brain can recreate a character, but some claim the entity remembers previous visits. That could be the mind-building continuity. Another is the shared report pattern. Some claim that two people who take DMT together see the same beings. This is hard to evaluate because people talk before and after. Suggestion can create matching reports. But even without direct evidence, the idea of shared vision is interesting. If shared visions could be verified under controlled conditions, it would change the discussion. So far, we do not have strong evidence. Now we will address the question of what we are seeing in terms of brain dynamics. In everyday life, the brain's networks are stable. Under psychedelics, networks become more flexible. The brain may shift from a narrow set of attractor states to a wider set. An attractor state is a pattern the system tends to fall into. In depression, certain patterns can be rigid. Psychedelics may loosen rigidity. This is one reason psychedelic therapy is being studied. DMT, because it is short, could be a tool for rapid shifts. But again, this is research. Now we will move to a careful look at the most insane recorded stories that include specific motifs. Motif, the cosmic library. Some people report entering a space like a library of information. It is endless. Books or objects contain knowledge. The visitor is told they cannot take it back. This motif appears in dreams and in mystical reports too. It could reflect the mind, representing memory and knowledge as a place. Motif, the alien classroom. The visitor is shown lessons by beings. The lessons are visual and emotional. The visitor is treated like a student. This could reflect the mind's learning systems. Motif, the childlike creator. A being appears playful, like a child. It creates worlds like toys. This could reflect the mind's creativity. Motif, the cosmic mother. A presence appears nurturing. The visitor feels safe. The visitor feels accepted. This could reflect attachment systems. Motif, the strict gatekeeper. A presence appears stern. The visitor is denied entry. This could reflect self-control systems. Motif, the trickster. A presence appears mischievous. It plays jokes. It shows impossible things. This motif appears across myth. The trickster is a symbol of chaos and creativity. Now we will discuss a major question. Why do so many people report similar scenes? There are at least 4 reasons. Reason 1, shared brain architecture. Human visual systems are similar. Reason 2, shared cognitive templates for agency and social interaction. Reason 3, shared cultural exposure, especially online. Reason 4, pharmacology creating similar neural conditions. These reasons could produce similarity without any external world. Now we will talk about the difference between DMT and other psychedelics. LSD and psilocybin are long. They allow narrative development. DMT is short and intense. This intensity can compress the narrative. It can feel like being thrown into a world. Salvinorin A, from salvia, can also produce intense and strange experiences, but it has a different receptor profile. The fact that different chemicals can produce different flavors suggests the brain is being pushed in different ways. Now we will address the question of the meaning of what we are seeing. For many people, the meaning is personal. They feel they saw their flaws. They feel they understood love. They feel they forgave themselves. For others, the meaning is cosmic. They feel they saw the structure of reality. For others, the meaning is unsettling. They feel reality is thin. A documentary must hold all of these without declaring one true. Now we will explore the most interesting theories about what DMT does at the level of consciousness. One idea is that consciousness is a model built by the brain, and DMT changes the model. Another idea is that consciousness is a field, and the brain tunes into it. Another idea is that consciousness is a process, and DMT changes the process. These are big ideas. What is solid is that DMT changes consciousness. Now we will look at what the scientific method can do here. Science can measure brain activity. Science can measure behavior. Science can compare reports. Science can test hypotheses about expectation. Science can test whether DMT increases certain kinds of insight. But science cannot easily test metaphysical claims. so we should be honest about the limits. Now we will extend the documentary into a longer exploration so the listener can absorb the full landscape. We will start with the molecule and the body. DMT is metabolized quickly. Enzymes break it down. This is why inhaled DMT is short. This also means that the body clears it fast. The short duration can be a safety factor, but also a risk because the onset is so fast that panic can happen. Now we will talk about dosage. Higher doses are more likely to produce breakthroughs. Lower doses may produce visuals without full immersion, but the exact relation varies by person and by method. Now we will talk about the role of breathing and oxygen. Inhalation methods can lead to breath holding. This can change blood oxygen levels. This could influence the experience. So some DMT effects could include physiological elements. This does not explain the content, but it can shape intensity. Now, we will return to the story layer. One of the most mind-bending aspects is the sense of being in a place that has its own rules. People report that objects respond to attention. They report that thoughts cause changes. They report that the world is like a language. This could be because the world is generated by the brain in real time. Attention selects content. The brain responds. In that sense, the DMT world is an externalization of the mind's internal generation. Now we will talk about the role of memory. Many people cannot remember the trip well. They return with fragments. This makes the experience even more mysterious, because the mind says it saw something huge, but it cannot hold it. This can create a desire to return. This can lead to repeated use. Some people report that repeated use changes the experience. They may see more familiar elements. They may see more personal content, or they may see less. Now we will address a special category of reports, the terrifying trips. Some people report being trapped. They report being tortured. They report being shown a hell world. They report being told they are not welcome. These reports matter because they show DMT is not always positive. In a brain model, these could be fear circuits being activated. The mind could create a horror scene. In psychological terms, this could be trauma content. The lesson here is that intense, altered states can go in many directions. Now we will address integration and meaning. Many psychedelic therapy approaches emphasize integration. Integration means reflecting on the experience, writing it down, talking about it, and making changes. Without integration, the experience can become just a memory of intensity. With integration, it can lead to change. Now, we will address the most interesting theories about what we are seeing, with a focus on what we can and cannot claim. The brain fabrication theory is the safest scientifically, but it can feel unsatisfying to those who had the experience. It can sound like dismissing, so it is important to state it carefully. Saying the brain made it does not mean it is meaningless. The brain makes all experience. The question is what the experience points to. It could point to the brain's own structure. It could point to psychological needs. It could point to philosophical truths. It could also, in principle, point to something external, but we do not know. Now we will look at the history of DMT in modern research. DMT was synthesized in the 20th century. It became a subject of interest in psychedelic research. It has been studied in limited clinical settings. It has also been used in underground settings. Terence McKenna popularized many ideas about it. Some of his claims were speculative, but his influence shaped how many people talk about DMT. Now we will look at the differences between inhaled DMT and ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is longer and includes a body experience. It often includes vomiting. It often includes visions with cultural symbolism. Inhaled DMT is fast and can feel more abstract or technological, but there is overlap. Entities appear in both. Now we will look at the role of ritual. Ritual can shape expectation. It can shape emotion. It can provide a story for what is happening. In modern use, some people create their own rituals. Others take it casually. This can shape outcomes. Now, we will move toward a conclusion, but we will take time to build the core message. The core message is that DMT is a powerful tool for exploring consciousness, but it does not automatically reveal facts about the universe. It reveals facts about how the mind can experience. It reveals that reality, as we perceive it, is constructed. It reveals that the mind can produce worlds. It reveals that meaning can arrive with force, and it reveals that the boundary between self and other can be unstable. The most mind-bending DMT stories are a mirror. They show how quickly the mind can become convinced. They show how the mind can create agency. They show how the mind can create a place. They show how the mind can create a sense of contact. This does not prove external contact, but it does not end the question. Because the question remains, why does the mind have this capacity? If the mind is only a survival machine, why does it have the ability to generate these deep symbolic worlds? One answer is that these worlds are side effects. Another is that they are built into the mind because of creativity. Another is that they are connected to the structure of the universe. This is where the most interesting theories live. Now we will offer a final set of grounded takeaways. First, DMT trips have consistent motifs: geometry, tunnels, entities, communication, places. Second, these motifs can be partially explained by known brain systems: visual cortex patterns, agency detection, social cognition, predictive processing. Third, the feeling of hyperreality is not a proof. It is a feature of certain brain states. Fourth, the meaning can be valuable without being literal. Fifth, the theories about what we are seeing range from strict neuroscience to speculative metaphysics. Sixth, we should hold the mystery without pretending we solved it, because the honest position is that DMT shows us something real, the reality of experience itself. It shows us that the mind can open into strange rooms. It shows us that consciousness has depth. Whether that depth is only inside the brain or also beyond it is not settled, and that is why the stories continue. In the end, the safest claim is simple. A DMT trip is not a photograph of the outside world. It is a powerful event in the brain and mind, but it can still reshape a life, and it can still force honest questions. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,